All Things Diversity event, the State of Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion in Our Community, Part 1. I'm Amy Ziegler with the Hershey Story Museum, and I'm also a member of our diversity planning group. Hershey All Things Diversity is a free series of programs to create awareness and promote acceptance and inclusion in our community. It is coordinated by representatives from Derry Township, the Hershey Story Museum, Derry Township School District, Milton Hershey School, the Hershey Company, Penn State Health, Hershey Entertainment and Resorts, and Hershey Trust Company. The events are sponsored in part by the Hershey Company, Hershey Entertainment and Resorts, Milton Hershey School, Penn State Health, and the Giant Company. As we're entering our sixth season of programming, we thought it would be a great idea to sort of take the temperature of DE&I initiatives throughout our community. So tonight, we are pleased to welcome a panel of speakers who will highlight how they are employing diversity, equity, and inclusion training and perspectives in their work with students and the community at large. Lauren.
Thanks, Amy. Tonight we'll hear from three panelists: Stacy Winslow, Superintendent of Derry Township School District, Chief Garth Warner of Derry Township Police Department, and Fonati Abrokwa, Special Assistant to the President of Diversity and Inclusion at Milton Hershey School. Both Stacy and Fonati also serve on the Hershey All Things Diversity Planning Group. Each panelist will provide an overview of the DE&I initiatives in their respective organizations, and then we will open things up for questions from the audience. So we encourage you to write your questions in the YouTube chat box, and they will be shared with our panelists. We're going to start things off with Chief Garth Warner.
Thank you, Lauren. Just to let you know, I volunteered for this first spot. So I'm glad to be talking to everybody. I appreciate anybody who's signing on to listen to this program. I'm honored to be able to talk with everybody. The thing that I'm going to be talking about is a course that I was recently enrolled in through the Martin Luther King Jr. Leadership Development Institute. So I want to first, I'm sure there are some people out there that don't know me, but I've either lived or worked in Derry Township all my life, was born and raised here, and have been with the Derry Township Police Department since 1988, have worked patrol, traffic safety. Most of my career was in the K-9 unit, about 20 years, handled 3 dogs during that time. I took promotion to lieutenant in 2012, and then was very honored to be asked to be chief of this department in 2016. And I really find it humbling and an honor to be able to serve the men and women of Derry Township Police Department and our community in whole. So very, very honored. That's a little bit of a background with me, very short, and we'll keep it that way. But through the Martin Luther King Jr. Leadership Development Institute, I was able to take a course on leadership development. Some of the topics that were covered were leadership principles, Dr. King's principles of nonviolence, influencing public policy, team building, community mobilization, creating a strategic vision. There was a law and justice aspect to the training, decision making and problem solving, professional networking and branding, implicit bias recognition, and negotiations and conflict resolution. So very different topics based in leadership principles, and all based in the teachings and the principles of Dr. King. So that's how this course kind of ran as far as what was involved in the course. It was quite lengthy. We met on the 3rd and 4th Fridays of each month, starting in January and ending up in June, late June. Actually, I think our class started a little bit late this year. I think we started in February and ended in July. But the classes originally had been all in person, But with COVID, they switched to a virtual platform, and I believe that's how they're going to continue the course, and that'll bring more people into the class and into the teaching. So you just had to make sure you weren't missing too much in the classes because there was a lot going on with the classes. There was a project at the end that we had to do, so it wasn't anything you just sat back and listened to. There was work that had to be done during the class, while it wasn't the most intense class with a lot of math or anything like that, it was definitely something you had to pay attention. You had to work towards getting that diploma at the end. We had presenters in the class that were pastors, federal public defender, Dauphin County public defender, a common pleas judge. We had a few people from law enforcement, public safety director, some administrative officer from Harrisburg Police Department, and we had, I think, a lieutenant colonel from the state police, attorneys, environmental lobbyists. We had a representative from a local chapter of the NAACP, and then also some representatives from University of Pennsylvania and Widener Law University. So a wide spectrum of speakers that came in and gave us perspectives on different topics within the class. So very, just that wide range of the sector that had leadership responsibilities and were able to convey messages to us of what they deal with in a leadership role and on their jobs. The facilitators were Dr. Keith Ellison and Joseph Robinson Jr., who is also the president of the Leadership Development Institute. So they facilitated everything, kept everything moving, gave us some really good content to mull over, and kept us guided when we were doing our projects and our assignments. So definitely tip my hat to those two. They did a great job and kept everything in perspective of Dr. King's teachings and his principles, and kind of guided everything back to that and kept that in focus. And forgive me, I'm reading some notes. I don't forget some stuff, but so my initial experience going into the class, I was interested. I knew there was going to be a wide variety of students in the class, different cultures, different races, and so I was definitely interested in meeting and talking with those people, kind of seeing where I kind of fit in with what I was thinking as far as leadership, and other business backgrounds other than law enforcement. I was interested in talking with folks to see how either another public service sector or another business viewed leadership and how they tried to institute leadership principles in the way they conduct business. A little bit nervous when I went into it. I was, kind of concerned on how I would be perceived. There was another law enforcement officer who is a lieutenant now, Lieutenant Tinner from Susquehanna Township, but we were the only two law enforcement officers in that class. So a little bit of nervousness going in to kind of, okay, how are we going to be perceived as law enforcement? Because over the last 2.5 years, law enforcement has taken quite a drudging through the mud because of some things that have happened, and I didn't know how it was going to be perceived by my classmates, and whether that was going to be something that was going to be a conflict for me. That was almost immediately relieved, and I didn't sense any of that. There were a lot of people from the Pennsylvania Human Relations Commissions in the class. That was a majority of the class, and I was just amazed at the level of intelligence and just their savviness as far as how to get business done in human relations in the commission, and just great people, just absolutely awesome people. And I was just blown away. It was a great experience. Everybody was welcoming, and the discussions were never, you never felt like you were in a confrontation with anybody. It was about listening. It was about trying to understand. And it was also about trying to throw ideas out and just trying to get conversations started. So it seemed fairly easy in this forum. So it was a great experience. Some of the work that we had to do while we were in there, we had to develop a personal mission statement. There was a 10-year projection that we had to develop. We had to write an acrostic poem about our name. Some other development evaluations, ethics and beliefs, mental development, physical development, which I can do a lot better on the physical development part. A dream inventory. We also went over Dr. King's letter from Birmingham jail. And I will admit, I had never read that until this class. So something that seeing how he was in conflict with some of the clergy at that time, and how he wanted to make sure that his ideals, principles, and beliefs were being heard and not just pushed to the side, and how everybody should come together at that point. It was very enlightening, very interesting to read. And then we had a class project where we had to pick out a politician in a certain district and kind of build on something that they had a platform on. So that took a lot of effort as well. I would be remiss if I didn't kind of point out some of my classmates. All my classmates had a big impact on me. But I know Anthony was attending quite often. He was on the road a lot, but he still managed to make classes and be able to participate in the classes. Zulai, she always had such a wise and creative way to look at issues. And she always seemed like she was very full of optimism. Merrick is extremely talented and always like a stabilizing factor in many of the conversations. Reverend Earl brought a lot of wisdom and knowledge to conversations and had such a depth of experience in his life. I really admired that. Gregory was passionate about current topics and situations and has a great sense of humor and a laugh. Stacy, an awesome woman who brought a lot to the class, and her input provoked thought on my part. Paula, probably one of the nicest people on the face of the earth that I know of. In fact, when we gathered for graduation, nobody had met my wife, Michelle. And when we gathered for graduation up at Hack, my wife went to use the restroom, and she came out and she commented that this lady Paula was in there, and she was just so nice, so complimentary of how the way she looked, and she didn't know my wife at all. And it just, that's who Paula is, and she's just such an awesome person. And then last but definitely not least was Darcy. I was able to talk with him over a dinner. And we had a good conversation on how police officers do their jobs. We didn't necessarily agree on everything, but that didn't stop me from knowing he shared some of the same values that I do. And we had a very civil conversation, and I would pick up that conversation with him anytime. So Darcy, if you're watching, anytime you want to talk, I will definitely have that conversation. Just a couple takeaways from the class. It provided me with a different way of looking at certain facets of leadership, ways that I hope to bring into what I stand for as a leader and a person. It reinforced the perspective that most all of us share common values. We all want to live a full life, have food and shelter for us and for our families, to be productive in our lives, and to treat others with respect and be respected ourselves. I think too often people lead into things with their beliefs and their values take a back seat. And when we do this, we cannot possibly find common ground in the middle. And we can't solve any problems that way. We would find out that we all want the same things in life, but are often blinded by our beliefs, and we're not focused on our values. It also showed me that empathy is very important. The saying goes that you cannot understand or have empathy for someone else until you have walked a mile in their shoes. I think we need to take it a step further, as we would only look at what the person is dealing with right now if we walk that mile in their shoes. We also need to know where those shoes have been over the last 20, 30, 40, or 50 years to fully relate and empathize with that person. So just a couple of takeaways from that class. Just a great class. I do want to kind of give a little bit of a shout out to Director Rob Martin from Susquehanna Township. He is the one that had been through this class prior. He's a prior graduate, and he mentioned the class to me and encouraged me to take this class. And then I met Joe Robinson, and that just kind of cemented things. And if anybody's ever met Joe and knows him, he could probably talk you into just about anything. But he reinforced my will and my want to go to this class and take it. So those two gentlemen, I really appreciate you. I appreciate your friendship. And I am glad that you talked me into taking this class. So that's about the summation of what that class is all about, and my experience having taken that class.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Chief Warner. Really appreciate you sharing all that information. And a reminder for this group, we actually do have a recorded presentation with the Executive Director of the Martin Luther King Jr. Leadership Development Institute, Joseph Robinson, that you just mentioned, Chief Warner. So, I encourage everyone watching to take a moment and watch that if they'd like. Now I'd like to turn it over to Stacy Winslow, Superintendent of the Derry Township School District.
Thanks, Lauren. Good evening, everyone. I'm Stacy Winslow. I am the superintendent of Derry Township School District. I've been in that role since May of 2021, and I've been with the district since 2012. I have been in education this is my 31st year, so I've really dedicated my life to education, and always humbled and honored to lead Derry Township School District. It's a wonderful community. It's a fantastic school. We have fabulous students, and also want to thank all things diversity for inviting me to be a part of the panel tonight. I've been involved with this organization since I invited myself to be involved with it several years ago. Is there's a really great partner with the community, and I'm happy to be here with Chief Warner and with Fonati. It's an honor to be with both of you. And so I was asked to share, what is the district doing to promote diversity, equity, and inclusion. And I'll back up just a little bit. Prior to COVID, we had been doing a lot of work around traditional equity topics, actually had some folks from Milton Hershey School come in and present many years ago on chocolate and poverty to introduce the topic of equity. And what we see a lot in the district is that our students that come from homes where there is a lower socioeconomic status, that sometimes there are barriers as they come into school and throughout their education that keep them from achieving at the same level as some of our other students with more fortunate households financially. And really wanted to begin to address that with our teachers and our staff. And I did some really great programming. We did a poverty simulation with CAP of Lancaster County. That's a really powerful simulation for staff and teachers to understand how difficult it is when one is in poverty and maybe working multiple jobs and trying to find resources for your family. So that was a very powerful experience. We've also done some work with identifying unconscious bias and what we all bring to the table, and kind of inviting people on a personal journey of looking at themselves and thinking about what their own thoughts and ideas are as they come into the classroom. We have a phenomenally diverse student body, and their diversity, of course, exists just by two people being in a room is diversity. But we do have students from all kinds of different backgrounds, and it's a blessing to our school to have so much brought to the table through our students and their parents' lives and different cultures and belief systems, and it enriches what we experience on a day-to-day basis. We did have a lot of work that kind of ground to a halt during the COVID years as we worked to get through all of that. But we did address a lot of issues with equity through that period of time with students who didn't have access to technology, for example, or students who didn't have access to internet that was reliable. And so the district made sure that every student had a device. We gave out iPads to everyone K through 12. We had not intended to become a one-to-one district quite that fast, but it happened and we were able to do it. And that was great to make sure that all kids could access their curriculum and their teachers and their learning. And it's paid off. We were able to do a lot with academics during that period of time and to stay connected with our families. We also purchased multiple hotspots that we were able to lend out to families so that they would have reliable internet service. And as we come out of the pandemic, I hesitate to say we're totally out of it. We're still certainly feeling the effects of it. But as we move forward and have our most normal school year in quite some time, we're starting to come back into this work and really looking at what has happened over these last 2.5 years, and the divisiveness, not just in our community, and I think our community's been fairly blessed with relatively little of that, but it still certainly exists, but nationally, statewide, really seeking to bring people back together and making sure that everyone has a space of belonging in our schools. And so our work has been around social emotional learning, making sure that students feel safe at school, making sure that their needs are being met in a multitude of ways so that they're able to access their learning, which is our primary goal as a school, is to make sure that students can learn. That's what we do. And we've been referencing the work of Floyd Cobb and John Crownapple. They're make that focus or not. It's not focusing. Everything's blurred out. Sorry. I put it right in front of my face. Maybe there it is. But the book is called Belonging Through a Culture of Dignity. And it's really about how do we ensure that all students belong and feel that they belong in our schools. And when we look at indicators of belonging, we're talking about being appreciated, having parts of your identity admired and positively noticed and or represented by the people around you, by the media that's represented in the curriculum, for example. One of our goals is to ensure that every student sees themselves somewhere in our curriculum throughout their experience at school, so that they know that there's other people like them. Another indicator of belonging is being validated, having your lived experiences, thoughts, and or feelings recognized and accepted as real. Even if you disagree on issues, it doesn't mean that your lived experience is negated. And that's a really important piece that we've been talking about and addressing is the ability to come together. And, in our community, we have about 3,200 members of our community walk in our doors every weekday. And it's really important that we are together, that everybody has a space in our community. Being accepted is another indicator of belonging that we're working on. Having your personhood completely embraced and regarded favorably without conditions attached to full belonging. And what we've learned through our culture through cult dignity is that a lot of times we have steps that we need to meet before we belong, as opposed to just belonging and then being able to share in that environment with one another as we truly are. That there's a difference between belonging and fitting in, that we don't want kids to feel like they have to necessarily conform to anything in particular, but we love them the way they are. And then of course, treated fairly, having interactions defined by fairness according to specific circumstances. I really liked what Chief was saying about it's not just walking a mile in someone's shoes, but really knowing where those shoes have been and what someone else has been through. Because sometimes being treated fairly does not mean being treated the same. It means meeting a student where they are and then helping them to move further along. So for us, our district priorities really are social emotional learning, which allows students to access the learning. As we came out of the pandemic, we saw a lot of, I know Chief and I met about this last year, the students were struggling and in ways that we really hadn't seen previously. And while we still have some work to do, it's a completely different environment in our buildings this year, but self-regulation was a big deal. So that's been one of our areas of focus. But a piece of that self-regulation is accepting others despite what their belief systems might be, and being open to having civil dialogue. And then of course our equity work, which removes barriers that limit access to learning. It's really important that all students have the opportunity to take rigorous academic courses if they want to, and that we're not doing anything to stand in the way of that. And then we have what's called a PLC process, or PLC model, which is professional learning communities. And that's a collaborative model that ensures that all students are learning at high levels. So ultimately, those three pieces connect to make sure that we are ensuring academic achievement for all students. And, lots of things have changed over the years that I've been in education. And I know in my own schooling experience, education was extended as an invitation. Here's your education. You may take part in it if you wish. You should, but it's an invitation. And we really approach it differently now that it's a guarantee. If you're going to come to school, we're going to guarantee that you learn. We don't live in a society anymore that has options for students that don't have high school degrees that are good options for them to be successful in life. And ultimately, as a community, it benefits us when students are well educated, highly educated, and then become contributing members of our community. And ultimately, that's what we're about. We want the students that we graduate from our high school to be your good neighbors in the future. And so when we are looking at what we're for and what we're working towards as a district, we want students to feel loved, welcomed, and safe in our buses, in our classrooms, in our hallways, cafeterias, our playgrounds. We want our students to be kind to one another and embrace the differences that they see with one another. It doesn't mean that somebody needs to change what they believe or to adopt someone else's beliefs, but to understand that we're all humans worth dignity and respect. We really are one of our goals is that for every student, by the time they enter high school, that they're connected to at least one school activity, whether it's athletics, clubs, or music ensembles. We know that a risk factor for students is to not be connected, to be disenfranchised from their community. And so one of our goals is to make sure that every student is connected in some way. We know we're not there yet, but that's something that's really important to us. We want to make sure that we're not finding any disparities based upon either economic status or ethnicity in our honors and AP classes. And what we know is that in the past, we have seen that in our AP classes in particular, we have a wonderful mix of students from different backgrounds, but our students that are coming from lower socioeconomic households are not as fully represented in those classes as what they should be for the number of students that we have in our buildings. And we don't want anything to be standing in the way of anybody getting the fullest education that they could possibly be getting. So we want, and we of course want families to feel welcome and supported in our schools. We want to create an environment where all individuals are treated with dignity and feel that they belong. And, we've been really working hard on that belonging and dignity piece. And, when we're thinking about dignity, we're talking about 4 core dispositions of empathy, patience, openness, and listening. And really what dignity encompasses is a humanization of everyone, that it's different from respect. Respect is earned and can certainly be lost, where dignity is ensuring that you're not using shame or embarrassment as a consequence or a punishment. You are recognizing that everybody has full human worth regardless of whatever else there might be about them. So really focusing on that piece of ensuring that is the culture that we have in our schools so that all students feel that they belong. And I think that pretty much wraps it up. We do see it as one of our goals to be a model for the community, for whoever wants to learn that, we all belong, we all have a voice. And our goal is to make sure that everybody is included in all that we have to offer.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Stacy. Now I'd like to take the opportunity to throw it over to Fonati Abrokwa, the Special Assistant to the President for Diversity and Inclusion at Milton Hershey School.
Good evening, everybody. Thank you again. Like I said, I'm a member of, like was stated earlier, I'm a member of the All Things Diversity Planning Committee. So I'm fortunate that I get today to share with everyone just a little bit about what we're doing at Milton Hershey School, but just a little bit about myself before I get to highlights of what's happening on our campus. I am a graduate of Milton Hershey School, proud graduate. I've been with Milton Hershey School for about 15 years, primarily within our home life section as an administrator. But like other organizations, after the summer of 2020, our school reevaluated where we were regarding our diversity efforts. And so out of that came my current role, where I report to our President Garth for Diversity and Inclusion. So strategically, it's been about 3 years in existence that we're really just looking at our school, similar to some of the things that Stacy described, from an equity lens to determine kind of some baseline metrics, evaluate our school from equity, our student outcomes, and to determine if there are any variances. And then what things that we need to do to course correct. But upon my role, we created what we're calling our diversity, equity, inclusion framework, which consists of 4 focus areas. It is an evolving document, which is great because I like to say in the space of DEI, no one is an expert. We're always growing and learning, hopefully. And so we compartmentalized our school in 4 focus areas: our workplace, our student experience, our students, which would consist of also our families, our external partners, and our alumni. And we really just are starting to ask stakeholders, leadership, to really look at our workplace in those areas and really determine, how do I directly impact equity within that space, or how do I indirectly influence it? And then determine goals and metrics from there. So within our workplace, just to briefly just describe in each of those areas kind of what our focuses are. It's recruitment, engagement, professional development, advancement, career pathways, and then compensation. So we did an equity study of pay within our HR. We're working now on a recruitment framework. Our greatest strength is our student diversity, as Stacy indicated, but we have recognized that particularly with what's happening in our nation around diversity in the education sector, we really wanted to take a strategic look at how do we diversify within our staff. So we're really being intentional about what does that mean, educating stakeholders about what is a diversity recruitment framework, because essentially I think there's a lot of misconception around what that means and how do you actively achieve diversity within organizations. And then we're really proud of our professional development we launched last year. Primarily for our education and student life group, which would consist of any of our staff who are front-facing positions within our organization. So that would be teachers, some of our support services, our social work, psychologists, our house parents. And similar to what was shared by Chief Warner and Stacy, we really wanted to just even the playing field with conversation. How do we learn from others' lived experiences? So we started by not calling it a training right off the bat, because we didn't want people to think I'm telling you something and you're doing something wrong. How do I learn from your lived experience from an empathetic lens, really focused on social emotional learning, some of those leadership models. And again, really, how would this impact the student experience then? Looking at our framework. And so we covered topics from bias, code switching, intersectionality. We defined diversity, equity, inclusion for our organization and how does that align to our mission and our sacred values. And I think really starting there allowed for our staff to feel like this is not a critique. This is not a judgment. We all have room to learn and grow. And that's really what this is about, hearing the perspectives and really humanizing each other's experiences. And so it was really powerful. And out of that, we created online content where we're going to push that out to additional stakeholders. And then also creating opportunities for our students to be involved in that training. I think that was very powerful because they got to see what content their caregivers were learning, and they got to help us create the content. Because many times our young people, we assume that they may not have the skills and the ability to engage, but they were spot on, and it was very powerful to hear them say, here's what we think, we would like our caregivers to know about where we stand on these topics and issues. So that was really powerful. And then one of the other things that I think we've been intentional about is also the student experience, but also how are our students leading in this space? And so just this past August, we had Lady Gaga's foundation star Stand Together Against Racism come to our campus. And those young people spoke with our student leaders about ways that they can champion and, really impact racism in their communities. And so again, it was a powerful experience because it's student-led, student-driven, and they've even taken some of the content from those experiences and have incorporated them within our entire student body. So there was a Be Kind movement, and now our SGA is actually morphing their own kind of campaigns out of that. So that has been really powerful. And then we've also created student leadership and advocacy opportunities. So within our day-to-day, I meet with an SGA representative who is our student body DEI liaison, and we just speak openly about what we're seeing, what's happening, and how can we address it. And then we take that back to their student leaders, and we work together to solve any issues that may arise. So we really, primarily our work thus far has been within our workplace and what does that look like, but then also our student experience. And then our alumni also have been very involved with inclusion panels and really trying to even look at our alumni population and how do we keep marginalized groups engaged in leadership roles and even staying in touch and engaged in our processes after they leave. And then minority-owned and women businesses is another focus within our alumni area. And we really want to enhance and promote, again, knowing that our student body is over 60% diverse. How do we leverage that from minority-owned businesses once our graduates enter the field? Excuse me. So again, we've been just really compartmentalizing each area of the school. And then one of our big, one of the messages we want to send is that this is a shared ownership. So even with our external partners, how do we work with our external partners to really enrich experiences for our students? So when we think about diversity, not just within racial components, but what experiences are we exposing our students to? So our students have participated in panel discussions with, our local police and our officers. And then we were really proud that we actually kicked off what we call student voice forums for our student body. And it's really student-driven conversations that they want to have with different adults or stakeholders on campus. And that first conversation took place actually with our campus officers as we, after and during the pandemic, prior to that, we were considering as a campus going, our officers being armed. And at the height of what was happening in our country, we thought, is this a good idea? And so who better than to kind of talk through that with our students? And so our campus safety officers, we had a panel discussion with those officers, and we were blown away by the thoughtfulness, the ideas, the conversations that took place with our students and our officers, and even initiated and implemented some of the ideas that flourished through that conversation. So just, from the simplest of allowing conversation, allowing opportunities for our students to be engaged, from defining diversity and inclusion for our school, because when you think of our school and the concept of existence, we're really in the infancy stages strategically of the work. So those small, simple things that seem minor really made a huge difference in culture. And so again, to what Stacy indicated, really focusing on how do we create inclusion and belonging in a residential setting where you're bringing young people from different backgrounds, different across the country, with caregivers who aren't necessarily their biological caregivers, and have these deep conversations, but then again, also create that sense of belonging. So we're really proud of even the process that we took to define that for our school. And so it was similar to a process we undertook we went through when we defined our sacred values. And so, we went across to different stakeholders and said, what does diversity, equity, inclusion mean to you? What would that look like in each of your environments? And then we defined it and then shared that back out with stakeholders and leadership until we were comfortable with, okay, this is what this should look like in each of the spaces we occupy and influence. And so it's really aligned, again, making sure that there was alignment to our mission, alignment to our framework, and in that shared ownership piece where it's not just the responsibility of our recruiters to recruit diverse talent, right? We value diversity. It's all of our responsibility. It's not just we establish a diversity, equity, inclusion team. It's not just a diversity, equity, inclusion team that would do the work. And so, again, really just trying to message that we're a collective community, and how do we, again, align with our sacred values, really promote that sense of inclusion, belonging for all of our community members, regardless of race, gender, ethnicity. And so even, again, some of the things that came out of that were some supportive clubs that came out for our student body. And so we now have a cultural diversity club. We have an LGBTQIA support group club for our students, and it just keeps evolving. We now have a student engagement team, and we have hair care and appearance student subcommittees that are all providing valuable insight to culture and community. So we're just really proud of the shift in the direction we're going. We know that the work is ongoing, but that's what it's about. We just want it to be a listening, learning, sustaining strategy, and that's part of our framework. So, once we get to a certain point, how do we sustain it? How do we go back to the beginning, listen, learn, again, for sustainability? So, we're really also proud that our students have been right alongside us with this journey and really building, because essentially that's where we are. We're really building our framework and metrics and evaluating our community, and they've been right alongside us doing that.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Fonati. Really appreciate it. And a reminder to the group, please, if you have questions, because we're now going to move to the question portion of tonight, please feel free to go ahead and put them in the YouTube channel. The first question I'm going to share is with Chief Warner. So Chief Warner, can you share some examples of diversity projects you worked on during the leadership training that may have applicability to your work here in Hershey?
So I want to say most of the inclusion and some of the things that had to deal with diversity were the topics that dealt with evaluating yourself, and how does that look in a leadership position, and how does that look, I mean, myself specifically in a law enforcement position, the ethics and beliefs development evaluation and the mental development evaluation, those type of things, and taking those principles that Dr. King espoused, and just trying to build them into a framework that you could take with you, and try to incorporate them in some of your leadership. We are always faced with the cold hard fact that our department is probably not as diverse as our community is, and it's something that we have struggled with, mostly because there is not a lot of interest from people of color, people of different races to get into law enforcement. So we struggle with that, and it's something that we know about, we know is there, but we try to see if we can get that person or two when we are doing hiring that has the qualities and values that we're looking for, but is, a person of color. We've actually over the years have incorporated that philosophy in hiring female officers to our ranks. I think as far as percentage wise, we're probably one of the leading departments in Dauphin County with female officers in our ranks, which is great. I'm a dad of 3 girls, and I would hate to think that they would be denied something that they wanted to do. None of them have said they want to go into law enforcement. I don't know. I guess I spent too many hours away from home when I was on the street, but if they wanted that opportunity, I don't want that taken away from them. So we have done some things as far as hiring female officers among our ranks, but I know we can do better when it comes to hiring people of color, and that's something that we strive to do every time we have an opening or two, and that's something that we are working towards so we can better reflect our community.
Okay, thank you. The next question we have is for Stacy. When you say that you try to have the students see others like them in their curriculum, how are teachers implementing that in their classrooms?
That's a good question. We're at the very beginning stages of that. And so right now, what we are looking at is just examining our curriculum and noting where we have good representation of the students that would be walking through our hallways and noting where there are gaps. So we have not yet moved to the place of changing anything necessarily. We have worked hard through literature as the English department and the middle school and the high school adopts new literature for students to read and takes things to the board for approval. They do make a conscious effort to ensure that they are choosing authors that represent our student body, that they are choosing books with characters that represent our student body, that they are choosing topics that represent our student body. What many people may not know is that we are a space that Catholic Charities has identified for refugee location, for example. And one of the books that has been adopted in our 7th grade curriculum for students to read is called Refugee. And it is the story of 3 different children who are middle school aged that have been through a refugee experience. And that helps to, one, it's excellent literature. And so there are all kinds of things that you can do with good literature for English learning, of course. But it also helps students who are refugees to see themselves represented in our curriculum, and also helps to build understanding and acceptance among the students who are unaware of those experiences. So that's an example of the kind of thing that we're working on. It is a goal of ours. We are not there yet.
Thanks, Stacy. This question, Fonati, is for you. Has any thought been given to opportunities for Milton Hershey School students and potentially Hershey High School students to share sort of differing life experiences in regards to sort of their lives, diversity, et cetera?
That's a great question. We would love to. We're always looking to partner with our community. Again, it's one of the 4 pillars of our framework. We have not done so yet with our neighbors, but we're absolutely open to it. Again, we worked with some students from Reading, and so it would be ideal to do so. We are working, or we will be working on a project with Derry Township in the township on a diversity mural, and I know that Derry Township students will be involved with that as well as our students. So there's a number of opportunities, and we would love and should do that for our young people.
Great. And we actually have another presentation where we had students from both high schools present. So check that out. Chief Warner, this next question is for you. What do you think that you will do differently in your interactions in the Hershey community as a direct result of your training in the Leadership Institute?
So, I guess it would be what we have always been trying to do is just create that community connection. We do foot patrols. We encourage the officers to get out, talk to people. The advent of the police car office, while it was a blessing in being able to do everything out on the street, it also became a hindrance and a barrier to be able to talk with our community. So we encourage officers to get out there and talk with people. Myself, I've kind of hinted. I don't know. It's just something I've always been geared towards, is having that mutual respect and having that wherewithal to be able to see somebody for who they are and what they represent. And just by being a person, I have to start at the base level of bringing civility and respect into the conversation. It's one of the lines I had always used when I was working on the street was, listen, I will give you as much respect as you give me. If we can get through this civilly, if we can get through this peacefully, I said, you will get nothing but respect from me in this encounter. So I think we have to look at it, every encounter, every person, that we at least try to give as much respect to that person as we can. So it would be something that I would try to instill the teachings of Dr. King in the respect for values, and just trying to espouse the common values. I mean, we have more in common than we do different. Our values are almost always the same. People want to be treated well. They want to be treated with respect so they can afford that back. So just trying to get people to realize on how you treat people and how you make them feel is going to last a lot longer than any other aspect of that encounter. We're still law enforcement officers. We still have to do those things that law enforcement officers do. We still have to arrest people. We still have to issue tickets, things like that. But it can be done in a manner where that person realizes that you are just doing a job, and that you're not being disrespectful to that person. So, trying to take some of these things, leadership aspect, and filtering those down to the rank and file, I think is probably one of the things I'm going to be able to take away from this, and trying to get other leaders in our department to be able to espouse those values as well.
Thanks, Chief. Fonati, can you talk more regarding the Student-Led Engagement Committee? How exactly does that work?
So we have actually several student engagement committees. So one is actually called SET, and it's this student engagement team. And really they're just promoting that community and belonging, and more so a programmatic aspect. But then some of our other student-led engagement committees work directly with policy. And so we have an adult appearance committee, and that I also sit on to make sure that our policies are all culturally sensitive, and appropriate in that regard. And so we have students who also sit from a student lens and meet with those stakeholders and give feedback, and even help with compliance in general with compliance with their student body. So it's direct link to any changes or considerations that we want to make. Our students are able to, in an appropriate advocacy way, kind of give some feedback to leaders who are involved with making those recommendations and changes. And they don't have to be the stellar, typical SGA students. Those students, they have to demonstrate the ability to be civil and engage with our adults and align with our sacred values, and be in general good standing to be a part of, to be selected.
Great. I have another one for Chief Warner, touching on your comment about being better represented. First, though, they did say thank you for recognizing the need to do better as a police force. That's appreciated. And the question is there a specific action plan that is being worked on to ensure better representation of the community within the police force?
So I wouldn't necessarily say there's an action plan. We don't have anything written out. What we were looking to do, there's two different methods that we do to recruit. One is through the county, through Dauphin County Chiefs of Police Association. They have a consortium testing and recruitment. Usually draws in a larger number of people than if we would run our own test, but sometimes we do run our own recruiting and test as well. And I think what our plan is to try to get to some of the institutions where we can reach out to a greater number of minorities, people of color, to hopefully get them involved in the process of taking the test and becoming involved in law enforcement. Just to give you an idea of what I was talking about as far as getting people interested in becoming law enforcement officers, I would say prior to the pandemic, maybe a year or two prior to the pandemic, prior to the murder of George Floyd, we would get, for that consortium test for Dauphin County, in the neighborhood of around 300 applicants, probably a little bit more than that, for that testing. This past year, we got 78. So it gives you an idea of how difficult recruiting has become for law enforcement. It's something that we struggle with. We anticipate that we will be finally up to full complement by mid next year. And we haven't been at full complement probably since 2018. We haven't had our full complement of officers. So we have some very tired officers, very dedicated officers, but that recruiting piece is very difficult. So our intent is, especially if we do our own testing, is to reach out to some of those institutions, maybe some of the colleges that have a little bit more diversity, and get them involved in the recruitment part of thing, and have people test, the people, minorities, and we can hopefully get them through the testing part, and get some. The last step is how are they fitting within the law enforcement, the field. So we always we do the academics, we do the physical testing and so forth, and then we do backgrounds and interviews and so forth, and it's all a process to see how they're going to fit in to the law enforcement field and into our department. So, but it is something that we strive to do and have been striving to do. It's just a little bit more difficult these days, but that we're not going to give up on it. So we're going to keep trying to recruit.
Excellent. Thanks so much, Chief Warner. Stacy, this one's for you. You talked about how sometimes there's some steps we need to make before we belong. Could you give some examples of what some of those steps might be?
And so, yeah, what we do want to make sure is that we're not making kids take those steps to belong, just to clarify that. But for our environment in particular, achievement is highly valued. And whenever you look at Maslow's hierarchy of needs, and if you look at it as a stair step instead of a pyramid, the pyramid comes from business books in the 60s. It was originally kind of meant to be a stair step. You look at physiological needs being met, safety needs being met, and the next step is actually belonging. And what we see sometimes is that belonging step is skipped until students have achieved. And once they've achieved something, whether it be in athletics, in computer programming and academics, but achievement is highly valued in our community and in our schools. And once someone has achieved something noteworthy, that others are like, oh, come be a part of this with us. Now you belong. We would like to see students belonging so that achievement is easier to get to. It's hard to skip that belonging step, to jump over that. It makes it a lot harder to get to achievement first and then feel that belonging. So that's an example of what we see.
Excellent. Okay, well, I think, there is another question. Sorry. Fonati, this one is for you. You talked about working to enhance and promote minority-owned businesses, especially alumni. Can you give examples on how you have done that?
Yes, so we actually created a business directory from our alumni. So when we request information about our alumni, we ask, do they have any businesses? And so we actually post that on our intranet site. And when we have events and activities from the president's office to how we ask our communities to engage, we encourage our staff to take advantage of that directory, or we ourselves look to engage those businesses to promote and support. So the business directory has been huge in helping with that. And so, it's kind of hard when you're a small business and you're trying to do things in bulk and different things. So we're really just trying to help leverage our alumni through support of their businesses. And our framework, includes even local minority-owned and small businesses. And we're hoping that will grow into, again, when we look at that fourth pillar of our framework, which includes our external partners, we're hoping that, a diversity procurement process will also be something that we're looking towards in the future.
Excellent. Well, I want to say a huge thank you to all of our panelists this evening. It was really wonderful and gratifying to hear about all the great work that you're doing in the DE&I sphere. And, after we've brought in so many speakers from outside of the community to come and talk to us, it's really nice to catch up with what's going on inside our community. It's great information, and we truly appreciate you being here with us tonight. I want to thank people who are watching online as well. And I want to remind you that tonight was part 1 of our look into DE&I in our community. November 30th at 7 p.m. we will be having part 2, and we will be hearing from representatives of some of Hershey's largest employers, including the Hershey Company, Hershey Entertainment and Resorts, Penn State Health, and Milton Hershey School. and they're going to discuss the ways that their organizations seek to attract and retain a diverse talent pool of employees. So we're looking forward to that. And also, finally, you may have noticed that you are watching us on Hershey All Things Diversity's newly established YouTube channel. We are no longer going to be hosted on the Derry Township site. So when you're looking for our programs, this is where you want to come. Please subscribe. Please tell your friends to subscribe. And we look forward to being with you again next month. Thank you all so much and have a wonderful